chive on him the best that we can. And in most cases, as always, we're even called upon to be gazed upon for people's enjoyment. That's why we perform. And one instance in history, for example, that we can take is King David in the Bible. After he was called on to slay Goliath, and when he was summoned to King Saul's court in Jerusalem, he was not hired to the king as a general or a leader. He was hired as a musician. Because the king's men understood that he had a mental condition, the king himself. He became very agitated. His anger was very triggered very easily. And he was always having bad thoughts, nightmares. And whenever David played his harp, the king was always calmed, without any question. Or in the early 1600s with the Jesuit missions to China, when the emperor allowed for Christian missionaries from Rome to come into the Forbidden City. And apart from, introducing the emperor to all these technologies that they had brought with them from Europe, one thing that they always did when they met the emperor was that they introduced the emperor to European music, and they always held a concert for him. Now, on the very first Jesuit mission to the Forbidden City, it did not go quite well at all. They held a concert for the emperor, some of the court musicians from the church, and they held the concert in the Forbidden City in the Grand Courtyard. And the concert went so horribly that the emperor was outraged, banned them from the Forbidden City, banned them from China altogether, and did not allow them to come back at all. Now, if you ever know about doing sucking performances, that's just the epitome of it all. That just sucks. It sucks absolutely. But later, another emperor had allowed for another Jesuit mission to come into the Forbidden City. And they went through the motions all over again, showing him all the technologies and the culture and how we do things. And they held another concert for the emperor. And this concert went on in the Forbidden City's courtyard, and it lasted for hours and hours and hours. And the concert went so brilliantly that the emperor broke with tradition, stepped down from his throne, and tried out the instruments himself, and he met the musicians. He was so impressed because oftentimes history has shown that the emperors of China have not been so interested in what technologies and stuff that Europe had, because they had everything already. But it was the music that touched the emperor that he allowed the Jesuits to stay in the Forbidden City. And the orchestral conductor of this ensemble, Karol Staweczek, he immediately straight shotted him to becoming the imperial court musician. Just like that. Now that is what I call diplomacy. And from that, it shows in our own history that musicians are worth more than just simply performing in front of a crowd. We touch people, we move people. And if you can touch the Emperor of China, I'm pretty sure you can touch anybody, with that being said. And I think, we are not often appreciated for that, what we can do, what our capabilities are in touching people. And why is it that we can calm people? We can touch people and calm them down, unify people, but not everyone else can. And the answer to that is quite simple. Because music is something that you cannot touch, but it is something that can touch you. And so with that being said, if you can tap into the human soul, you can quite frankly tap into anything. And that is what is amazing about a musician. In 1976, Bob Marley was actually scheduled by the Prime Minister of Jamaica to perform a concert in front of 80,000 people amidst a very, very nasty era of tension between the two predominant political parties in their own government. And things, even in the protests and the riots, things have turned deadly where people were losing lives. And 2 days before Bob Marley was set to perform the concert, an assailant had broken into his house and attempted to kill Bob Marley, his wife, and his manager, Don Taylor, and shot them. But 2 days later, Bob Marley was still there to perform. And he performed in front of 80,000 people. There was a protest that was meant to be scheduled within that exact same week after the concert, and it was canceled. People were so touched by his performance because his music was always about love and bringing everyone together in a crowd where there's no need to hate. And with that, the protest was canceled altogether. Isn't that amazing? Just the very talent, the very how a musician can just simply touch people by the message in their music. And I think, with that being said, it is from things like that, where it shows that music and musicians, we're so much more than people who produce sound in time. We're so much more than that. We are, if anything, music is the cultural notion that is presented in front of people as an identity. It is an identity, it's a presentation of ideals. And it is something that is powerful enough to stamp an entire identity as a name on an entire generation. I mean, in the 1960s, with the anti-war movement against the Vietnam War, I mean, it was a movement that was further propagandized by the music that people listened to. I mean, it was always about love, 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 something like that, you know what I mean? Martin Gaye can explain so much better than I can. And it was something that was really in full swing. It was just the music that took people. I mean, it's not like these kids were listening to Mozart, were they not? When they went to go and protest. But one place for me as an analyzer, as a nonpartisan thinker, as a musician, one place that I have seen where music is so prevalent is just in the heart of a person, even in their religious setting, or even in their depression. Because even more important than the music itself is the musician. Because music is nothing more than the consequence of who the person is. It is the audio manifestation of that person, the passion, the love, the thinking, the movement, the emotion. And one place I find that is so demonstrated, interestingly, from analyzing all these different places in preparation for this TED Talk, was churches. I find it rather interesting how, like, in the atmosphere when everyone is doing what they believe is worship, it is the music that is really getting people all moving. It's the moving, it's the moving. The music is always moving everybody inside the sanctuary. And if anything, it's the atmosphere of what they believe is worship is what I've learned is how the church gains converts. Because while everyone is having their hands up in the air about doing what they believe is worship, the band is playing, and they're playing music that is very set to the atmosphere of what is being portrayed in the front. I mean, it's sentimental, it's moving, it's calming, it's thinking. And one thing that I've learned is that when the band is playing, because I've sat through enough church services, let alone churches themselves, to understand when the band is not playing good, how awkward the atmosphere gets when you're trying to be serious. But when the band is playing very, very well, the music becomes secondary. The very presence of this good music becomes secondary. Whenever there's bad music, we can't help but to notice it. Whenever there's good music, we get comfortable in the circumstance, in the atmosphere that is trying to be portrayed. Therefore, there's a sense of unity and focus as to what is happening in front. That's why I think, why don't we even begin with how impactful the atmosphere, like in a church, for example, where everyone is just moving and they have their hands up doing what they believe is worship. And it's always the good music that is moving everyone. When the pastor does the altar call and people go down to the front, it is feelings-based. And that was by the power of the musician. But the one thing, in order to get in these kind of atmospheres, whether it is a religious setting or even in a secular setting, the desired atmosphere that people look for when we're setting a certain tone at a funeral, where it's very sentimental, or at a party where everyone is celebrating. This is an atmosphere that cannot be brought around by people who simply play their instruments. That is an atmosphere that can only be brought around by musicians themselves, not people who simply toot on a horn and play chromatic notes, if you will. And the reason why, like I said before, it is because it is a human emotion. It is the manifestation of who the person is themselves, where the music is coming out from. It is a human characteristic, and that is why people are able to relate to musicians rather than politicians. And it's the drive, it's the move, it's the move, it's the move, it's the move that people always love to follow, the feelings. And that is why people listen to musicians quicker than anyone else. And, given that there's always something to look for, something to drive for, something to dance for, we musicians are the ones who are tasked of supplying that by the very nature of our own psychological chemistry. That, simply put, is the character of the musician. That is simply put the ability of the musician to be able to communicate with somebody, anybody, whoever it is, on a deeper and more intimate level than what anyone else, whether it is a psychologist or a doctor, can. That is the ability of the musician, and if anything more, that is the power of the musician. Thank you.